Salve omnes, or in this case, Salve 2. Since I'm really just doing this video for one of you, but theoretically it works for anybody. Since I don't really have the opportunity to easily go between the two classes, or have not made the time to do so as much, we'll go through what I can of the AP class on video. And I'll share videos with you, and if you have questions over these, by all means, feel free to ask. But hopefully this will give you at least some idea of what to expect and make sure that you're on the right track and things to look for, especially as we work through the different authors and their styles. So I'm going to start with Caesar. Since we're doing that, I'll do a chapter, as it were. So I'll do chapter 1, and then, tomorrow or something, try to do chapter 2 and see where it takes us. So, first sentence, beginning of Caesar's De Bello Gallico. Gallia est omnis divisa in partes tres, quorum unam incolunt Belgae, aliam Aquitani, tertiam qui ipsorum lingua Celtae nostra Galli appellantur. So, we can do the first bit kind of in English word order. Gaul is all of it. Gaul is, as a whole, divided into 3 parts. So he's doing a little bit of flowery word order here. Normally omnes would go before Gaul, but he wants Gaul to be the first word of the sentence, the first word of his book, as it were. So all of Gaul is divided into 3 parts. And we're going to describe these 3 parts. This is one sentence. This is one half of a sentence, and it's a relatively compact sentence. He doesn't repeat a lot of the stuff that we might want to repeat in English. So it's divided into 3 parts. One of these parts, the Belgae inhabit. So the Belgians inhabit one of these parts. The Aquatani, another. He's not repeated incolunt. He is not repeated quorum. So the Aquatani incolunt aliam quorum. The Aquatani inhabit another of these parts. The third part of these, those who, in their language, in the language of themselves, are Celts. In our language, they are called Gauls, inhabit. All right, so incolunt is repeated in all 3 of these. The Belgians inhabit one part, the Aquatani inhabit a second part, and then the Gauls or Celts inhabit the third. But he has left out quorum, and he has left out incolunt each time, right? And this is really shortened as well. You would expect something like qui, those who inhabit the third, or those who are called Gauls inhabit the third. But he doesn't even give us an antecedent. We just get a relative clause, and we're just supposed to assume that that is the subject. And so he's very concise. He's very efficient with his language, and that can cause a lot of problems starting out. As I said earlier, authors, the beginnings of their works seem to be the most complicated part. So that's kind of what you're dealing with here. It's once you can kind of like unfold it, it makes sense, but it's a little bit harder for us. One, it's reverse word order, right? Normally it's subject, object, verb, and we're getting object, verb, subject in all of these phrases. So lots of reasons to be a little thrown off here, but we can see hopefully how it goes together. Hi omnes lingua institutis legibus inter se differunt. So, hi omnes, all of these inter se differunt. They all differ among themselves in these 3 ablatives. They differ by means of language. They differ by means of customs, institutions, and they differ by means of laws. So you can say they differ in language, institutions, and laws, by language, institutions, and laws, with language, whatever the case, right? It's an ablative showing how they differ. All right. Next sentence. It's a short sentence, but again, it's somewhat of a compact sentence here. Again, he's starting with the accusative. Gallos ab Aquatanis garumna flumen. Okay. Belgis matrona et sequana dueted. So we want to repeat dueted in both halves of this, and to some extent flumen in both hands of this, and in some extent, I guess, gallos as well. So let's start with dueted. We'll put that in the first half. The Garumna River, Garumna flumen, divides the Gauls from the Aquatani. And then the Matrona and Sequana rivers divide the Gauls from the Belgians. So you get accusative, prepositional phrase showing separation, the thing that separates them, and then the verb for separate. You get gallos not repeated. You get duedet not repeated, but ab Aquatanis matches up with ab Belgis. Garumna flumen matches up with Matrona et Sequana. Again, not easy to do this at all, especially starting out when we're used to textbook reading. It is easier than Virgil, so that is why we're starting out with Caesar. Virgil poetry it's another twist to what we're seeing here. So, and honestly, this part is kind of dry because he's really just giving us kind of a little bit of an ethnography and a little bit of geography. There's not a whole lot of action or intrigue or anything like that. So, horum omnium fortissimi sunt Belgae, proptera quod a cultu atque humanitate provinciae longissime absunt, mini me quad eos mercatores saepe comeant, atque ea quae ad effeminandos animos pertinent important. Proximique sunt Germanis, qui trans renum incolunt, quibus cumque continenter bellum gerunt. Whew, look at that sentence. That is a chunky sentence. When I'm translating, when I get a long sentence like this, go from punctuation to punctuation, go from, use punctuation marks as dividing lines, use conjunctions, ets and whatnot as divisions, use verbs as divisions, right? Do what you can. I'm going to more or less go from punctuation to punctuation, I think, here. So, horum omnium fortissimi sunt Belgae. Horum omnium, genitive plurals there. Of all of these, horum omnium, of all of these, the bravest are the Belgians. Or the bravest of all of these are the Belgians. Propteria quod, this is just a fancy, long way of saying quod. We know quod because. Propteria quod is probably like the full way that you should say because. But most Latin just leaves out the propteria. Caesar chooses to, ironically, not leave out some words or phrases, but will leave out like the repetition of direct objects and whatnot. I don't know. It's kind of like for the reason that blah blah blah, or you can very simply just translate these as because a cultu atque humanitate provinciae longissime absunt. So because they are absent, we can go to our verb. They are absent from the cultu, from the culture and the humanity of the province. They are away from those things, longissime. They are the farthest away from these things. So you have a map in your textbook. You can reference that map, and you can see that the province, what he means by provincia here is, he's referring to northern Italy. He is in charge of what becomes modern northern Italy. He is governor of this region. And so the Belgians are the farthest away from this province that he's in charge of, which is essentially Italy. Right. The others, the Aquatanians, and the Celts or the Gauls, they are a little bit closer. Aquatania and Gallia, those are more or less modern day France. Belgium is more or less modern day Belgium. So cultu and humanitate, somewhat redundant. Caesar likes to do this a lot. Usually one of these words refers to like a concrete physical concept. So cultu might be the actual trappings of their culture. So types of buildings, tools that they might use, whatever kind of you can look at and be like, that is a Belgian thing. Or in this case, that is a province thing, right? Yes, that is a northern Italy thing. And then humanitate is more the abstract, kind of the ways of thinking, the behaviors. You can't quite put your finger on. It's like, that's what the northern Italians do. But that's kind of what you've got here. And we'll see this a lot, where he'll use kind of an abstract idea and a concrete idea together, where they could basically be translated as the same word in English. You could say from like the culture and the culture of the province, but try to find a little bit of variation there. So that's one thing, right? They're the bravest of all these Gauls, or the people that I've mentioned, because they're the farthest removed from the civilization of the province, and and the least to them, or minime saepe. Mercatores is our subject here. Merchants go to them, komeant. They travel to them, minime saepe. They travel to them the least often. This word order, not intuitive. I would like to have like minime and saepe together. So we know that they definitely go to together. Caesar chooses not to. You kind of get it. It's kind of going with Eos here. The least to them, merchants often go. The merchants go often to these Gauls, but they're perhaps going to spend more time going to the Aquatanians or the Gauls, as opposed to all the way to the Belgians, right? So merchants don't go to them very often. That's another reason why they struggle, or they're very brave or fierce, fortissimi. And merchants import or carry to them the least often, right? So we're kind of repeating minime saepe with comeant and important. The merchants bring to them ea quae, the things which, and then we get a relative clause here, the things which, you can go with the English word pertain. I frequently translate pertinent as pertain in Caesar. So, which pertain to the effeminandos animos, to the weakening of the mind. It is obviously the word effeminate is in there. So the things which pertain to the effeminizing, the feminization of the mind or of the spirit. So, having like nice clothes and having like warm jackets and whatnot makes you weak, makes you womanly, is the idea here. And the Belgians don't get that, and so they're tough and hardy because they have to brave the elements with just their manliness. Obviously sexist. That's I'll say that's Caesar, but really that's just kind of men throughout written history. And yeah, so that's just the way it is. And you don't have to translate it as a feminine. You can just say the weakening of the mind, but we can read the Latin. We know what Caesar's actually saying. So, merchants travel to them the least often. Merchants import to them the things which weaken their spirits the least often. And a third reason they are the bravest, or I guess the fourth reason we are at now, they are proximi sunt. They are the closest to the Germans. Germanis here, dative, just two, right? They're closest to the Germans. The Germans, qui transrenum in Coland, relative clause, going with Germanis, the Germans who live across the Rhine River. With whom, again, going back to Germanis, so you get Germanis qui and Germanis quibuscum, with whom they continually bellum gerunt, they continually wage war. So the Belgians, far away from the niceties of the Italian province, and they don't even get these niceties delivered to them. On top of that, they have to deal with the Germans, and the Germans are a fearsome foe for Rome. Rome makes it into what would be modern-day Germany for like a few decades or something, but they don't last very long there. So this is a compliment to the Belgians. They're constantly warring with the Germans, and they're surviving, right? All right. Now he gets perhaps a little sidetracked, right? We've been talking about the Belgians, the Aquatanians, and the Celter Gauls, right? But then suddenly, qua de causa, for this reason, that is fighting with the Germans, for this reason, the Helvetians also precede, English word precede, they surpass the Reliquos Gaulos, they surpass the remaining Gauls Virtute, an ablative, again, ablative of means. Caesar loves his ablatives without prepositions. So if you're looking for something to brush up on, I would brush up on my ablatives. The Helvetians also surpass the remaining Gauls in virtue, with virtue. Now, I translate it as virtue here. I wouldn't translate it as virtue. Ultimately, it's really kind of the idea of manliness or courage. It does have wir in there, which means man, or right? So, and that's really what he means. He refers to this kind of like courage in battle. It is often this virtuous idea. So the Helvetians surpass the remaining Gauls, the other Gauls, in courage. The really close Gauls, the other Gauls, the remaining Gauls, basically kind of the Gauls that I've already mentioned, but I'm leaving behind because I'm focusing on the Helvetians. The Helvetians surpass them, quote, because they contend with the Germans, they struggle, fight with the Germans in quotidianis proiliis, in fere quotidianis proiliis, in almost daily battles. We would think that the fere is perhaps unnecessary in English. Latin likes to be very specific with what it says. So although most people probably don't imagine that he means literally every day they're fighting, Caesar wants to be absolutely clear that it's like, look, it's not every day, and I recognize that. I'm not being hyperbolic. That is for poets. I'm going to speak very literally. So they struggle, they fight with the Germans in almost daily battles. Notice contingent here to struggle or fight. It's not what we learn in Cambridge, where it means to hurry or rush. This is actually like English word contend, to struggle, to fight. And then we get cum here, and we get cum prohibent and cum gerunt. These are both indicatives with cum. Cum means when here. It's not with an ablative. There's no ablative going with cum. It's not being used with a subjunctive either. And Cambridge doesn't talk about this, but cum clauses can use indicative verbs rather than subjunctive verbs. It's just another way of saying when. It's perhaps a slightly more vivid way of saying when. So it's kind of they struggle with the Germans in almost daily battles whenever they prohibit them, whenever they keep them from their borders, or whenever they wage war, they themselves wage war in their borders. So that was a lot of theirs, right? Confusing in English, less confusing in Latin. I'll point out that what's going on with the pronouns here. Eos refers generally to a person or a group of people that is not the subject, whereas suis or ipsi refers to the subject, right? So suis refers all the way back to the Helvetians. So the Helvetians prohibit the Germans from their own borders, so they're defending Helvetian land against Germans, or they themselves, the Helvetians themselves, are waging war in the borders of those people, of the not Helvetians, that is, the Germans. So eos and eorum refer to Germans, suis and ipsi referring to the Helvetians. All right. And this is what we're going to focus on, right? Like we get this little aside here with the Helvetians, and that is what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on the Helvetians at first, and then as we kind of go through the other books, we'll kind of touch on. We'll deal with the Belgians, we'll deal with Aquatanians, we'll deal with all of that. But right now, we're going to focus on the Helvetians. He goes back into a little bit of a geography lesson about the layout of the land. Some suggest that this is not actually Caesar's writing, that this was added at a later point. I'm inclined to support that theory, just because he's like, blah blah blah, the Helvetians, because they're fighting with the Germans all the time, are super strong, And then part 2 starts with apud Helvetios, among the Helvetians, right? But here we get this kind of weird geography lesson. So we'll go over the geography lesson, but it might very well be something extraneous that somebody else put in there. To kind of give you a little bit more idea of what's going on. So now we go again. We certainly go talking about land again. One part of these areas that I've mentioned, which it is said, dictum est, passive verb, right? Which it is said that, indirect statement, which it is said that the Gauls obtain or hold. One part of them takes its beginning, caput initium. It takes its beginning. It starts from the Rhodanus River, the modern-day Rhone River. It is contained. It is held in. It is bordered or bounded, something like that, by the Garumna River. Garumna flumine, ablative of means. It's contained by the Garumna River. It's contained by ocean, or it's bordered by ocean. The borders of the Belgians, the borders of the Belgae, and it even kind of like reaches from the Sequani and the Helvetii. It even reaches the Rhine River, stretching from the Sequani and the Helvetians. It turns to the Septentriones. It turns to the Seven Stars, which is the Big Dipper, I think. Little Dipper, Big Dipper. It's called the Plowman for the Romans. It's the North. This is a fancy way of saying the North. He's referring to the constellation here. You get a layout in your book. You get a map, and you can see kind of how the Gallos region, right, Gallia, is situated. You can start from the Rhone River, which would be farther south, southeast. I don't have the map in front of me. You get the Garumna River kind of bordering it. Ocean, right, which would be the Atlantic Ocean, kind of contains the northwest part. It borders the Belgians in its northeast area, and it does reach from the Sequani and the Helvetians to the Rhine River. And so it has, I think, this little jut out, basically, where you get all of Gaul, and then it kind of juts out a little bit into Germany. The Belgians, the Belgae, from the farthest borders of Gallia, from the extreme reaches of Gaul, arises. So everything is kind of in relation to, when it comes to directions, when it comes to like farthest or closest or something like that, it's the kind of the center of the world is Rome. So when we talk about the farthest borders of Gaul, we mean with relation to Rome, right? So the farthest borders of Gaul, as far as Rome is concerned, the Belgians arise from there. So the northern part of the Gauls. The Belgians pertain, I would say stretch in this case, stretch to the lower part of the Rhine River. And again, I think the idea is Rome is it's the top and the middle of the world, and kind of everything else in the world kind of goes like this. So when it talks about like the lower part of the Rhine River, I believe it means like everything's kind of flowing downhill from Rome. So it stretches to the basically the mouth of the Rhine River. The Belgians face, I would say, into the north and into the Orientem Solum. They face into the north and the rising sun, which would be the east. English word orient comes from this. All right, so the east is where the sun rises. So they look to the north and the east. I don't know what that means. I don't know if like the land kind of like spreads out in a northeastern way or what, because maybe it just means that it's kind of northeast of Rome. I don't think it is though, so I'm not entirely sure what that means. That's what it says. They kind of like they face to the north and the east, but exactly kind of what it means to face that way as a country is lost on me. Also why I think it's not Caesar. Caesar's a better writer than this. Aquatania, the third region that we'll talk about. Aquatania pertinet, it stretches, in this case, stretches from the Grumna River to the Pyrenees Mountains and to that part of the ocean which is towards Spain, or just kind of at Spain. So if you look Aquatania, it would be southwest. Southwest Gaul, southwest France. If you know about European geography, the Pyrenees Mountains is the border between France and Spain. So we can, this information is probably enough for us. Aquatania stretches from the Grumna River to the Pyrenees Mountains and the part of ocean which kind of pertains, or which is near Spain. Aquatania looks or faces between the falling of the sun, so between the west, and the Septentrionis and the north. So again, they're facing northwest somehow. I'm not quite sure. I guess northwest for your camera view somehow. If you look in the map, I think you can see in your textbook kind of what that means. If we kind of look at Gaul, like Gaul proper, as the center, the Belgians they're kind of from Gaul, they're kind of facing north and east, and Aquatania is kind of south and west. That might be what he means when he says they face there. It's like they're on kind of this area in relation to Gaul proper in the middle. So that's part one. Super hard, I think. Super complicated. You get, very compact sentences. You get dry material, right? It is Caesar talking about geography, talking a little bit about ethnography, but it's nothing super exciting, right? It's going to get exciting when we get into part two. Among the Helvetians, by far the most noble and the richest was Orgetorix. And this guy is going to be kind of the main antagonist for the really the rest of the book. We read through part 7, through chapter 7 in the Latin. You should read the entire book in English. The whole of book 1 is available in English in the back of your textbook. So with that, I'm going to stop there. Nice 30-minute long video, but again, it's a dense beginning. I think the other videos will be a little bit shorter. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, email me, message me in class. You can comment on these videos on YouTube, and I'll respond there if I have to. So with that, thanks for joining me. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. I will see you next time. Wale.